Good morning, everyone. Time for the scripture reading. Happy to be here on a beautiful day. Sun is shining. And we had a beautiful week. Kind of the last day or so it was a little colder, but earlier in the week, can you believe 70 in the area? Today's scripture reading is found in Luke chapter 20, verses 21 to 25, and I'll be reading from the NIV. This is under a section called Paying Taxes to Caesar. So the spies questioned him, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach what is right, and that you do not show partiality, but teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" He saw through their duplicity and said to them, "Show me a denarii whose image and inscription are on it." "Caesar's," they replied. He said to them, "Then give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. Amen.
All right, well, again, happy to see you folks. Happy to see you folks visiting us. If you are visiting us, I invite you before you leave today, make sure you stop by that wall right there and read that little document that's on the wall. It tells you what this church is all about and what God's doing in this church. And so we're so thankful to have you here. Well, this week we get the privilege of celebrating and at the same time learning about a topic that kind of gets brushed off to the side, and that is religious liberty. Now, a lot of times when it gets announced, hey, next week we're going to talk about religious liberty, everybody's like, oh, not religious liberty. It's going to be so boring. I've heard that all week. It's going to be so boring. But I'm going to tell you today that it's not. It's not. In a message that's entitled, Love People, Fear God, and Honor State, we are going to look at religious liberty from different points of view. But before we do that, I want you to think about something. What if you today lost your religious freedoms that are yours here in the United States of America? What would you do if you lost these, for example? The ability to practice your faith freely. What if tomorrow morning you heard that they passed a law in a midnight session that said no longer can you worship on a certain day? No longer can you practice your faith in public? Well, what would you do? What if your freedom to live out your convictions as God has laid them upon your heart was taken away from you, or that you had to go into hiding to do so? What about the right not to be forced underground to worship or forced to follow a government-mandated religion? How many of y'all would like to have that happen? Yeah, nobody. But yet at the same time, you do realize that it is a real possibility, and that at some point in the future, according to Bible prophecy, may very well be a reality that we all see. So that alone should tell us that we should be so appreciative for the land we live in and the freedoms that we have. What about this? What if you lost the liberty to live in your diverse community? Because we all live in different areas, right? And we've all got different neighbors and so forth, and they all have differing beliefs. What if you had to go to bed fearing that in the middle of the night someone from the government or someone from another religion was going to storm into your house when you were at your most vulnerable and take you away, or worse yet, kill you because of your beliefs? Now think about it, folks. This is actually going on around the world, right? This is literally happening. Everything I put on the screen is literally happening. But we're sheltered here in the West, right? We're sheltered in America. And oftentimes we're told by people, these things will never happen in a free world that we live in. Understand one thing, if you forget everything else that goes on today, understand one thing. Freedom oftentimes is temporary. Freedom that we think we live is mainly because we've been allowed to. It can be taken. And the Bible tells us as we move forward that that is a real threat. And that's why today I want us as Christians to say that we will stand to protect our religious freedom. If you watch the news, you listen to radios or podcasts or however it is you get information, religious liberty is a topic that is getting more and more attention, and not because it's good news, but because they're trying to limit it, right? And so as we look at this and we understand the Bible prophecy, we begin to see that the world is starting to look at a warped kind of religious liberties. Now, when I say warped, it'll become more obvious as I move on here. There's a lot of rumors swirling around the political world and the world we live in today that religious liberty is only about protecting Christians. Friends, that is incorrect. You see, religious liberty, and this is what we struggle with sometimes, religious liberty is about everybody being able to worship and live out their convictions as they see fit in a land that is free to do with it, even if it disagrees with us. Right? And that's the problem we have, right? We're okay if you live out this type of an atmosphere of worship and religion. We're okay if you have this type of a church or this type of and you could go on all day. But now, if you've got something that's a little different, you need to understand that our nation was founded on Christian principles. Okay, let's say it was. It still doesn't mean that we treat anybody else any differently. Because if we were founded on Christian principles, the last time I checked, being a Christian was meaning you were a follower of Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ, when he was here on this earth, never differentiated in different peoples. He loved them all. He embraced them all, even the ones the society said was not the way it ought to be. And if you are a true supporter of religious liberty, that means that you support everyone's right to worship as they see fit and to live out the beliefs that they see fit. Now, I will admit to you that oftentimes we don't see other religions having that same open mindset, right? Matter of fact, there are religions around the world that are out to kill Christians, right? That's not the way it ought to be. But what we have to do, and listen closely, what we have to do is control what we can control. And that's us, right? We live out Christ in us on a daily basis, which is a loving, accepting religion, if you want to call it that, a loving, accepting character to the world around us. That shows that we are connected. Another fallacy that happens with religious liberty is it's only about keeping church and state separate. Well, that's in there, right? It's in there. We do want to keep church and state separate because if not, guess what happens? Church and state gets together and then state begins to tell you what church is going to be. Matter of fact, we saw that during 2020, 2021, in the COVID situations around our country, California, Texas, New Mexico, New York, where the state began to say, okay, you can worship, but you have to do it this way. You have to wear masks if you're going to worship. And you can't sing if you're going to worship, because when you sing, you project, and that makes your breath go further on out. And some of us spit when we talk, and so therefore that's going to go out, right? And they said, no, you can't do that. Then they said, it went even further, that it's beyond COVID, and while we're talking about it, let us make sure that you're not preaching hate. Right? And so please make sure that you send your sermon in to get approval from the council or the mayor or the governor or whoever it was, right? Thankfully, now this is going to sound a little funny, stay with me. Thankfully, we got a sneak peek at what it looks like, right? Because now, friends, we have to understand that if they were able to do it in a few states, few counties, that's a practice run. You see, you always do a practice run, okay? It's coming. So it is even more important that we understand as Christians in the world today that we need to stand firm on what religious liberty is all about. You worship your way, I'm going to worship my way. We will live together in harmony. And guess what? Salvation is a personal issue. And so you and I will take care of that between us and our God. But we will live together, respect each other, and appreciate each other for the gifts that we have, the talents that we have, and promote the diversity that we have in our churches and our communities so that we all can grow as a unit together for the good of all mankind. That's basically religious liberty. Now, we're going to talk as today, we're going to look deeper into what it really is. We're going to talk about is religious liberty really in the Bible, religious freedom, how did it come about, all that, and then what does Jesus say about it? We're going to get into that. But based on the war that we see around us and just, we're going to talk just about North America here, the things we see that are happening on a daily basis to try to get prayer out of this, prayer out of there, God out of here, the Ten Commandments out of there, just keep pushing it away and away and away. We need to do what Ben Carson said. Ben Carson said we need to resist this war on God. We need to resist the war on freedom of religion, and we need to resist the war on freedom of speech. There's one way to do this, ladies and gentlemen, in our life, and that is stand firm for what religious liberty represents in our world today. Now, you might wonder, how far back does this movement have? Was it something that just happened in the United States? Where did it come from? Well, if you dig back into history, and I'm going to tell you flat out that the history of religious liberty or religious freedom is real muddy. But one of the earliest records we have is from a church father, Tertullian. He evidenced Christianity's involvement in promoting religious liberty around 200 AD. Tertullian remarked, "It is a fundamental human right. It is a privilege of nature that every man should worship according to his own convictions. One man's religion neither harms nor helps another man. It is assuredly no part of religion to compel religion, to which free will and not force should lead us." And I really like this slide that's on here. It is so important that you and I understand this. My religious viewpoint or my religious perspective doesn't harm you. You're free to make your own decisions. You're free to do as you please. All I ask is you respect what I choose. Right? And I will respect what you do, because nowhere in the Bible will you find God forcing himself on you. Right? Nowhere do you find a prophet being sent to a group and the prophet says, "Listen, this is how it is. You're going to worship God. You're going to do it now. And if you don't, you're going to be penalized." Now, he may say it's similar to this. There is a God in heaven that loves you, and he wants you to be with him forever. If you choose not to, then you may have to suffer consequences you don't like. Right? But nowhere does it say, "You're coming with me, I'm going to shackle you up, and you're going to worship God if he kills you." Right? Because that's not who God is. And that wasn't who Jesus was when he walked upon this earth. He always gave people the choice. And when our forefathers and our ancestors came over Wherever they came from, doesn't matter. But when this country was started, it was all started around freedom. Right? Freedom away from the governmental tyranny that was happening in their homeland. But also part of that was also freedom from the religious tyranny that was going on. Now, a lot of people don't want to recognize that. They don't want to recognize that that's part of our origination story here in the United States. But whether you want to recognize it or not doesn't make it true or false. The fact is, it was. And there's many things that will show that. So let's talk here about religious liberty. Up here on the screen, you see the First Amendment, Bill of Rights. It says, Congress shall make what? No law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, I'm going to stop there for just a second. Do you know that during the height of COVID regulations, that there were pastors who were arrested for opening their church? There were people, I remember one instance, and this happened in Canada, but still we keep it in mind. A whole church was taken to jail. I bet that was quite the little reunion inside the bars and at the jail, don't you think? Having all them church folks there, that'd been an opportunity to recreate old Paul and Silas, wouldn't it? Start singing Amazing Grace, right? But I'm just telling you that if they can do that in something that's about COVID, right? What are they going to do when they feel that the fabric of the United States is ripping apart at the seams, and that they need to subject a law on people to get things back in order? And we know that things will get so bad at one point in time that what old devil will do, what Satan will do, is he will say, hey, you know what we need to do, don't you? We need to all go back to church, right? Oh, and by the way, we need to do it all on one particular day. Right? So if you guys will have a day of rest and make it on Sunday, we'll have everything closed down. We'll get everybody going back and having a family day. And if anybody doesn't want to do it, well, we'll come over, we'll slap their hands in the beginning and say, oh, now, tisk, you should be doing this. You should be over here, right? You should be doing that. Right? But in reality, what will happen? It will continue to get worse and worse, and they will blame the people who are the outliers. And if you're not doing what the government says you're supposed to be doing, there will be a high chance that you will pay some form of repercussion. No, not in the United States of America. Oh, yeah. God has blessed this country far and wide for years upon years. And what has this country done to God? I always chuckle when there's such an emphasis to get prisoners to study the Bible. Now, I think it's awesome. I love it. I've done it myself. Right? But if we had them studying the Bible when they were kids and not kicking him out of school and not kicking him out of everyday life, maybe they wouldn't need to have Bible studies in prison because they wouldn't be there. But again, there's religious liberty in our world. You can worship if you wish. You cannot if you don't wish. Next, it says, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. You do realize that our First Amendment has a lot of stuff in it. And if you think back just in the year of 2022, how many times each one of these things were attacked, right? Why would you ever attack the freedoms of the people? Because you would probably prefer them not to be so free. You would probably prefer them to be indebted to you as a government or a leader. You would probably have an easier time to rule if everybody was underneath a subset of just real confining directions or laws. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you those things will happen, but I got better news for you. It don't matter. Because Jesus is our protector. He is our hope. He is our leader. It doesn't matter who's sitting in the White House, because God is still on the throne. And that's the world I'm in. I'm a journeyer through here. I'm on vacation, and it's a horrible vacation, but I'm on vacation through here, right? And I'm headed to my home, and I hope you are too. The problem is we get too bogged down here on vacation, right? I know that when my wife and I go on an actual vacation, it goes way too fast. You ever have that happen? Before you're looking at it going, oh, we're going to spend 7 days here and we're going to do all this stuff, right? And then you get there, and the next thing you know, you go to sleep, you wake up, you've been there 6 days, it's time to go home, right? And you're coming back home like, oh, golly, right? Man, I'm telling you what, this vacation trip has lasted long enough. I'm ready to go. Right? I don't want to be on vacation no more, and I hope you are too. But the reality of it is folks, we've got to stay here for a while. And the reason why we've got to stay here is because God has a mission for you and me. Right? No matter how young you are, no matter how old you are, it doesn't matter. God has a mission for you. And that one single solitary mission is very simple. Not easy, but simple. Allow Him to work through you to gather as many people as possible to go to the home in the sky. Very simple. So part of that is going to be respecting each other, and that's where religious liberty comes in. Religious liberty is the freedom for all people to live out their faith according to their deepest of convictions. To be free means to be unhindered. Religious liberty is about our deepest convictions in every aspect of our life. It's not about church. I mean, church is part of it, but it's about life. It's about allowing Jesus to live through us. It's about when people hear us, see us, work with us, walk with us, talk with us, that they hear and see Jesus coming out of us all over. That's what it's about, right? Because we believe that God is glorified by living in accordance with what He teaches. Is that what we believe? Is that what we believe? Because if not, I'm closing up and going home. Because nothing's going to matter from this point on. So if that's what we believe, that God is glorified by living in accordance with what His teachings are, you've got to understand that His teachings are oftentimes going to go against what the government tells us to do. And so what do? Well, we're going to get to that. I want to go to Thomas Jefferson here. The constitutional freedom of religion is the most inalienable and sacred of all human rights. Do you believe that, church? Are you living it? That's the thing, right? You say, well, what do you mean, are you living it? I'm going to share with you in just a few minutes how we can live out religious liberty. But before I get there, I want to share with you a quote. Now, first of all, I know it's old. Not as old as Thomas Jefferson, but this next one's old. It was from Ronald Reagan, but I have used this every time I've ever spoke about religious liberty because I love what it says. We establish no religion in this country, nor will we ever. Oh, if you only knew. We command no worship. We mandate no belief, but we poison our society when we remove its theological underpinnings. You know, we live in a world that exists on situational ethics. Situational ethics is simply this: whatever feels right at the time, do it. Right? The Bible is not situational ethics. The Bible shares with us how we are to live our life. He goes on and says, we court corruption when we leave it bereft of belief. All are free to believe or not to believe. All are free to practice a faith or not practice a faith. But those who believe must be free to speak of and act on their belief, to apply moral teaching to public questions. And that, ladies and gentlemen, that last line, even back in 1984, was the problem. We're always going to have questions in society. We are. We're always going to have questions in politics. But whatever you do, don't take a theological approach to it. Because then that's when we're going to have a problem. But let's go back when Jesus was alive and well, walking the face of the earth. Did His teachings differ with the Roman government? Yeah. Hey, I got one for you. Did his teachings differ with the religious authorities at the time? And so, as we know, Jesus and his disciples traveled to a lot of areas, a lot of cities, a lot of countryside. But never once did Jesus go, oh, we better not go there, because if we go there, they're going to get pretty upset. And so we'll just... No. But you know what he did that we sometimes miss? He always preached the truth. He always told the truth. He lived the truth. But everything he said and did was covered by love and delivered in love. If we are going to be effective as ambassadors, and you'll know why in a minute why I say this, as ambassadors of Jesus and the religious liberty that needs to hang on in this country as long as God wants it to, everything we do and say needs to be brought forth in Christ's love to everyone around us, regardless of whether they're Christian or not. It doesn't matter. Now, something you hear that's happened in the past couple of years, they start losing the terminology of religious liberty, and they're substituting it with freedom to worship. And they think they're the same thing. I'm here to tell you today they are not the same thing. Let's look at this real quick. Many in the government are adopting a phrase called freedom to worship. It was really big in Biden's last edict that he did about religious liberty for the LGBTQ and all the marginalized folks. And what they did was they started off talking about religious liberty. But after you got past the first paragraph, the next 9 paragraphs and the rest 7 pages all refer to it as freedom to worship. Okay, let's read this. Freedom to worship or of worship is a distortion of the broader understanding that not only we are to be free when we worship inside church, but we are to be free to exercise religion in all areas of our life. Folks, if society is successful in getting minds changed to say, well, we're really talking about freedom to worship, that is the first big hit against religious liberty, because religious liberty is more than just having the freedom to worship. Some people say, well, it's all about separation of church and state, and it is. But it is so much more, and it's up to us as Christians to share, show, and live what it really is. So the question, is religious liberty in the Bible? Let me see a showing of hands. How many think that religious liberty is in the Bible? How many of you are unsure? How many of you are asleep? Okay, because there was a lot of hands not raised. Okay, so you will not find anywhere in the Bible that thou shalt not hinder religious liberty. You will not find that. But I will tell you, from cover to cover, religious liberty is smacked all over the Bible. It is everywhere in the Bible, because at the very root of religious liberty is choice, right? And that's what the Bible's about. What's your choice? Are you going to live for Christ, or are you not? Are you going to love the people, or are you not? Are you going to worship God or something else? Choice. And as Eston read in our scripture today, he read out of Luke. I'm going to show you the same part of it, but it's in Matthew. The Pharisees sent some people to Jesus to try to catch him in a trap, because they don't believe. See, the Pharisees don't believe in freedom of religion. They want to catch this new guy in a trap, and so naturally they come to him and they fill him full of all these wonderful accolades. Oh, teacher, we know that you are true and you teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone else's opinion, or you are not swayed by appearances. Oh, they're puffing him up real good, right? Then they hit him. So, is it lawful to not pay taxes? What say you? Right? And Jesus handled it the way Jesus always handled it. Things. He says, well, let me have your denarius. And so somebody gives him the denarius. And so on the denarius, he looks at it. Now this is it's a poor copy because it's very, very old. On the front of it is Caesar. On the back of it is the goddess. Okay? And the goddess is all about plentifulness. Okay? And so Jesus, he said, very simple, who's on this thing? Caesar. Okay. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Render unto God what is God's. But now I got a problem. I thought everything was God's. So how in the world do we live out Jesus' instructions? I hope that this next part helps you. I know you're familiar with how the United States sends ambassadors to other countries, right? We have an ambassador, I think, for almost every country that will allow us to have an ambassador, right? And so as individuals serve as ambassadors, they represent the United States in a foreign country. Okay? Now, while they are in the foreign country, they abide by the laws that are in that country, except for the ones that go against the United States laws. That's why the ambassador's house and the ambassador's office, I don't know what it's called, building, whatever, what? Embassy, thank you. Those are areas that still go by the United States law. Right? That little protected area. And as long as he stands in that protected area, you can't do anything with him if you're the law of the other country. Right? And so as we look at that, we need to think about us being ambassadors. Because where is our home? Where are we living? Right? Yeah. So we are ambassadors for Christ in this troubled world that we live in. Matter of fact, even Paul said that in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 20. Now then, we are ambassadors of Christ as though God were pleading what? You got to do better than that. God doing what? Pleading through us. Why do we send an ambassador to other countries? We try to negotiate peace. We try to negotiate deals. We try to build up relationships, that type of a thing. It's as if the president is there. That's what the ambassador represents, right? Guess what? As Paul has written here, we are called to be ambassadors. And when we go into the world, we represent, or we're supposed to represent, the president, God, to the world. We're to build relationships. And he goes on to say, we implore you on God's behalf, be reconciled to God. So, as we close, we're going to look at these tips today. Like political ambassadors, we are to obey and support our governing authorities. Romans chapter 13 and verse 1 says this, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Now, let me tell you something, folks. There have been some authorities appointed in my lifetime that I wondered how in the world did they ever get appointed. Right? But you understand, God allows these things to happen on a broad scale to draw people to Him. Right? Just as in our own life, things happen, trials happen, calamities happen in our own life. Why is it allowed? Well, number one, it's a testimony to the sufficiency of Christ to get us through whatever it is, and that's a witness to the world. But why does God allow certain things to happen in the world we live in today? It's all about drawing mankind to Him. Remember, He will not come until He can save all that will be saved. That's how much love is there. Now, we think to ourselves, but why does it have to be so difficult? Why does it have to be so hard? Why does it have to be so frustrating? And I'm going to answer it for myself and not you. Because I'm an idiot. That's why. I don't take the lesson when I'm supposed to take the lesson. I don't take the lesson the easy way. Instead, I have to be hit over the head with a brick, my wife says, to get the point. I'm telling you, the United States of America right now, and for the past few years, has been hit over the head with a brick because Jesus is coming soon. And He is drawing people to Him left and right. Next, Romans 13, 6 and 7 says this, for because of this, what we read, you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Okay, so we're going to recognize that this is the government we live in, and we have to honor the state in the things that we can honor the state in. Next, 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for who? All men. Why? Here's why. For kings and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. Now, I don't want you to raise your hand on this, but I want you to think about it. How many times have you prayed in the last year or so for President Biden? How many times have you prayed for your local mayor? How many times have you prayed for whoever that's in governance over you? Now, you may have prayed, Lord, get him out of office. Right? You may have prayed that, but that's not it. That's not it. You pray for their health. You pray for their mental. You pray for their spiritual. That God may be able to do something that they will allow Him to do. You see, it's hard when we see people working against God to pray for Him. But I'm telling you right now, that's what Jesus did. He prayed for everybody, not just those that agreed with Him. And I believe that's what we're supposed to do. So if we take that prayerful approach to the local, then what do we do about God? Well, here we go. Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord, or the respect of the Lord, is the beginning of what? Knowledge. But fools despise wisdom and instruction. So, number one, the thing we do for religious liberty to work in our world is we put God first. We respect Him, and we ask Him for the knowledge and the wisdom we need. Acts 5, verses 28 and 29. Paul writing, saying, did we not strictly command you not to teach in this name? Oh, this is what the Sanhedrins were saying, right? They had stopped Paul and Peter, I think, at this point, from preaching. And they'd already told them not to do it, right? And so it says, and look, the Sanhedrin says, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine and intend to bring this man's blood on us? Notice the response. And Peter and the other apostles answered and said, what? We ought to obey God rather than man. But wait a minute, you just said over here that we need to follow the laws and do that. You do. You do. You need to do that as part of society. But when their laws overshadow God's call and God's direction and God's ministry, you follow God. But here's the thing, when you're following the laws of the land, you're also following God, because He just asked you to do that and respect that and pray for them. Now next, 2 John chapter 1, verse 6, this is love, that we walk according to His commandments. This is the commandment that you have heard from the very beginning, that you should walk in it. So, we walk in God's commandments as a result of a relationship with Jesus Christ. It's a natural result, right? So then, as we walk in that, we live our life. And then when man's laws do not counteract that, we honor those. We do that. Okay? But if it goes against what God has called us to do, we must serve God instead of man. And that is further said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. No man can serve what? Two masters. For either he will hate one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or in other words, riches is what mammon is. But this is a principle. Who are you going to choose? Who is priority? And whatever you choose today, as your priority will also reflect down into how you see religious liberty. If you choose God, you will follow the things that He has asked. If you choose man, God will be put on second priority for you, and eventually His priority in your life will fall majorly. I love a quote here about Christian freedom because it's still in the same thing as religious liberty. From William Barclay, it says this: Christian freedom does not mean being free to do as we like. What does it say? It means being free to do as we ought. Right? Religious liberty is all about being free to do what we ought to be doing in our society that God has called us to do while recognizing the freedom of others. 1 Peter put it this way: submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom to cover up evil. Live as God's slaves. Oh, nobody likes to hear slave, right? How can you be free? Slave means you're dedicating your life to something, right? You are following something. You are loyal to something. Verse 17, show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God and honor the emperor, or in our world, honor the state. Love your people. Fear God. Honor the state. And as I close, I have a question. Religious liberty is one of the most important aspects of a Christian's calling in the world we live in today. Too often, as we found out, it's been ignored. And sadly, in our own day, religious liberty is caricatured in comics, it's mocked, and it's dismissed. So here's the question that I leave for you today, church. If the majority of society will not champion the principle that is so important and so necessary for our social order, who will? I hope your answer is, I will stand for God and religious liberty for all in this nation that we live in.